The plane's cabin buzzed with quiet luxury, but tension crackled like static. Naomi Williams, a black woman in her late 30s, sat calmly in her plush leather seat, her tailored navy blazer pristine, her gaze steady. She was used to being underestimated, but today, that would cost someone dearly. Across the aisle, passengers sipped champagne, unaware of the storm brewing. Lauren, the lead flight attendant, strutted down the aisle, her crisp uniform as sharp as her demeanor. Her eyes locked on Naomi, narrowing with a flicker of disdain. Something about Naomi's quiet confidence didn't sit right with her. Lauren's smile was tight, her voice colder than the ice in the drinks she served. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I think you're in the wrong section." Naomi looked up, her expression unruffled. "This is my seat," she replied, her voice even but firm. Lauren's lips pursed, her patience already fraying. "This section is for elite passengers. You need to move to the back." The words hung heavy, drawing glances from nearby passengers. A nosy socialite craned her neck, whispering to her companion. A businessman frowned, sensing the edge in Lauren's tone. Naomi didn't flinch. "Check your passenger list," she said simply, her eyes never leaving Lauren's. The flight attendant's smile vanished. "I don't need to check anything," she snapped. "I know who belongs here." The cabin grew quieter, the soft hum of the engines amplifying the tension. Lauren crossed her arms, her voice rising. "Move to the back now, or I'll call security." Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some murmuring, others pretending not to notice. One muttered, "Why doesn't she just move?" Another shrugged, probably sneaking a free upgrade. Naomi leaned back slightly, her calm unshaken. "Call whoever you need," she said, her tone steady but laced with steel. "I'm not moving." Lauren's face flushed, her authority challenged in front of everyone. She turned to Grace, a junior attendant hovering nervously nearby. "Grace, escort her to the back. Now." Grace hesitated, her eyes flicking to Naomi, then back to Lauren's glare. She wanted to check the passenger list, but Lauren's sharp stare silenced her. "Yes, ma'am," Grace mumbled, stepping forward reluctantly. Naomi's gaze softened as she looked at Grace, then hardened as she addressed Lauren. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly, her words carrying a weight that made the air feel heavier. Lauren scoffed, waving off the warning. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Get up." The businessman across the aisle leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Is everything okay here?" Naomi nodded, offering a small smile. "I'm fine, thank you." Lauren whirled on him, her tone sharp. "Sir, don't encourage this disturbance." She pointed at Naomi. "You're causing a scene." The businessman's brow furrowed. "From where I'm sitting, you're the one making a scene." Lauren's face reddened, her control slipping. She leaned closer to Naomi, her voice low and venomous. "Why don't you admit you're in the wrong seat and stop wasting everyone's time?" Naomi's eyes narrowed, but her composure held. She reached for her phone, typing quickly before setting it down. "You'll regret this," she said softly, her words slicing through the tension like a blade. Lauren smirked, undeterred. "We'll see about that." She gestured to Grace again, who stepped closer, her hands trembling. The cabin watched, breathless, as the standoff intensified. The socialite whispered loudly, "She's probably trying to sneak a free ride." Lauren seized on it, her voice carrying. "Exactly. We have rules for a reason. Some people don't respect them." Naomi didn't respond to the insults or the growing murmurs. Her silence was a quiet defiance, louder than any outburst. Grace glanced at the passenger list clip near the cockpit, her fingers twitching, but Lauren's sharp "Grace, what are you doing?" stopped her cold. Naomi's calm was a stark contrast to Lauren's unraveling. The flight attendant's voice rose again, sharp enough for the whole cabin to hear. "I'm asking you one last time, move to the back, or I'll call security." Naomi looked up, her tone even, almost soothing, but unyielding. "I've told you, I'm not moving." The socialite gasped, the businessman's frown deepened, and Lauren's frustration boiled over. She turned away briefly, muttering to herself, then resumed her duties with a forced smile, her eyes still darting to Naomi. The cabin remained tense, passengers whispering, waiting for the next move. Naomi sat quietly, her book untouched in her lap. She'd been patient, but Lauren's hostility was relentless. When Lauren passed with a tray of sparkling water, she served others first. Mr. and Mrs. Raymond, an older couple, got warm smiles and quick refills. Naomi, however, was ignored. She spoke up, her voice gentle. "Excuse me, could I have some water?" Lauren paused, her eyes cold. "I'll get to you when I can," she said curtly, walking past. Naomi's gaze followed her, but she said nothing, her composure a silent rebuke. Minutes later, Lauren returned, tray in hand. Naomi stretched her leg slightly into the aisle, a small, natural movement. Lauren's eyes caught it, and instead of stepping around, she veered closer. Her foot struck Naomi's leg, and the tray tilted, glasses crashing to the floor, water splashing onto Naomi's lap. Lauren gasped theatrically. "Watch where you're putting your legs. You've caused a mess." Naomi looked up, startled but composed, brushing water from her trousers. "You walked into my leg," she said calmly. Lauren's face twisted. "Don't blame me for your clumsiness." Passengers turned, startled. The cabin pulsed with unease, the spilled water pooling at Naomi's feet, her navy slacks darkened by the splash. Lauren stood over her, tray clutched tightly, her theatrical gasp morphing into a sneer. "Look at this mess," she said loudly, ensuring every passenger heard. "If you'd just moved, this wouldn't have happened." Naomi's gaze remained steady, unflinching despite the cold water seeping into her clothes. "You bumped into me," she repeated, her voice calm but firm, cutting through Lauren's accusations. The businessman across the aisle shifted, his frown deepening. The nosy socialite leaned forward, whispering excitedly to her companion, her eyes gleaming with gossip. Lauren's face flushed, her authority challenged again. "Don't twist this," she snapped. "You're the problem here." She turned to the other passengers, seeking support. "Some people think they can do whatever they want." Murmurs rippled through the cabin, some nodding in agreement, others looking uncomfortable. Grace, the junior attendant, stood frozen near the galley, her hands twisting nervously. She wanted to speak, to point out the passenger list, but Lauren's earlier glare still lingered in her mind. Naomi brushed more water from her lap, her movements deliberate. "I've only asked for the same respect as everyone else," she said, her tone even but piercing. "If that's too much, maybe you don't belong here." The words landed like a slap, and Lauren's eyes widened, her anger flaring. "You think you can talk to me like that?" she hissed, stepping closer. The cabin fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. Passengers held their breath, sensing the situation spiraling. Grace's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with dread. The businessman half stood, his voice low. "That's enough," he said, but Lauren ignored him, her focus locked on Naomi. In a flash of unchecked rage, Lauren's hand shot out, striking Naomi across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the cabin, stunning everyone. Gasps erupted. The socialite's jaw dropped, her earlier smirk gone. Mr. Raymond, the older passenger, lowered his newspaper, his expression darkening. Naomi didn't flinch. Her hand rested calmly in her lap, her face still composed, though a faint red mark bloomed on her cheek. She straightened slowly, her eyes locking onto Lauren's with a quiet intensity that made the flight attendant hesitate. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Naomi said, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. The words hung in the air, heavy with promise. Lauren's confidence wavered for a split second, but she quickly recovered, scoffing. "Regret it? What are you going to do, call the police?" Naomi didn't respond. Her silence was louder than any threat, and it unnerved Lauren more than she'd admit. Grace stepped back, her face pale, torn between fear and a growing resolve. She glanced at the passenger list again, her fingers trembling as she considered checking it. Lauren noticed and snapped, "Grace, stay out of this." The junior attendant froze, her heart pounding. The businessman spoke again, his tone firm. "You're out of line," he told Lauren, but she waved him off, her voice shaking with anger. "She's the one causing trouble." Naomi's gaze never left Lauren. "You'll see," she said quietly, her words carrying a weight that sent a chill through the cabin. The passengers watched, some whispering, others filming discreetly with their phones. The socialite muttered, "Who does she think she is?" but her tone was less certain now. Mr. Raymond folded his newspaper, his wife pausing her knitting to exchange a glance with him. The tension was unbearable, the hum of the plane's engines the only sound breaking the silence. Naomi reached for her phone again, her movements slow and deliberate. She typed something quickly, then set it down, her calm unshaken. Lauren's eyes flicked to the phone, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "You'll find out," Naomi replied, leaning back in her seat, her composure a stark contrast to Lauren's unraveling. The flight attendant tried to regain control, turning to serve other passengers, but her hands shook as she poured drinks. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes, the judgment in their stares. Grace, still near the galley, discreetly pulled out her phone and stepped into a corner. Her voice was barely a whisper as she dialed a number. "It's Grace," she said when the call connected. "We have a situation on the plane." She glanced at Naomi, then at Lauren, her resolve hardening. She knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. Lauren, oblivious to the call, paced the aisle, her polished shoes clicking sharply. She tried to focus on her duties, but her thoughts raced. Why didn't Naomi fight back? Why was she so calm? The doubt crept in, gnawing at her confidence. She replayed the slap in her mind, the sound echoing in her head. What if she'd misjudged this woman? Naomi's quiet authority didn't match the assumptions Lauren had made. For the first time, fear flickered in her chest. She glanced at Naomi, who sat serenely, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in. The businessman leaned toward Naomi, his voice low. "Are you okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his eyes. Naomi turned to him, offering a small, grateful smile. "I'm fine," she said softly. "Thank you." Before he could say more, Lauren interjected, her tone accusing. "Don't encourage her," she snapped. The businessman shook his head, his patience gone. "You're the problem here," he said plainly. Lauren's face burned, but she turned away, refusing to engage. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something she couldn't control. Naomi's words echoed in Lauren's mind. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." The flight attendant tried to dismiss them, but the unease grew stronger. She glanced around, hoping for support, but the passengers' faces told a different story. The socialite whispered to her companion, shaking her head. Mr. Raymond's stare was cold, disapproving. Grace, now back at her post, clutched the passenger list, her hands trembling. Lauren's heart pounded. She'd let her anger and prejudice take over, and now, she could feel the consequences looming. The cabin remained tense, the air thick with anticipation. Naomi sat quietly, her presence a silent force, her calm a weapon sharper than any outburst. Lauren tried to carry on, but every step felt heavier, every glance from a passenger more accusing. She'd crossed a line, and deep down, she knew it. The plane soared on, but for Lauren, the ground was crumbling beneath her. Trouble was brewing, and it was only a matter of time before it arrived. The cabin hummed with tension, the aftermath of Lauren's slap hanging like a storm cloud. Naomi sat composed, the faint red mark on her cheek a silent testament to the assault. Her eyes, calm but unyielding, followed Lauren as the flight attendant paced the aisle, her polished facade cracking. Lauren's hands trembled as she rearranged trays, her sharp glances at Naomi betraying her unease. The passengers watched, their whispers growing bolder. The nosy socialite leaned toward her companion, her voice low but audible. "She's got some nerve, staying so calm." The businessman across the aisle tapped his fingers, his gaze steady on Naomi, as if he sensed something bigger brewing. Lauren tried to regain control, her voice clipped as she addressed the cabin. "Please, everyone, let's keep things calm," she said, her tone forced. But the passengers weren't listening. Their eyes darted between her and Naomi, the memory of the slap replaying in their minds. Grace, the junior attendant, stood near the galley, her face pale but resolute. She'd made her call, and now she waited, her fingers clutching the edge of the counter. Naomi's words echoed in the silence. You just made the worst mistake of your life. Lauren felt them like a weight on her chest, her earlier confidence dissolving into doubt. Naomi reached for her phone again, her movements deliberate. She typed briefly, then set it down, her expression serene. Lauren caught the gesture, her stomach twisting. "What are you doing now?" she demanded, her voice sharper than intended. Naomi didn't answer immediately. She leaned back, crossing her legs, her calm a stark contrast to Lauren's unraveling. "You'll see," she said softly, her words carrying a quiet menace that made Lauren's pulse quicken. The flight attendant scoffed, trying to mask her fear. "Empty threats," she muttered, but her eyes betrayed her, flicking nervously toward the cockpit. The cabin's atmosphere shifted as footsteps sounded from the front. The cockpit door swung open, and the pilot emerged, his face tight, his posture rigid. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on Lauren. She straightened, forcing a smile. "Captain, what's going on?" she asked, her tone too bright. The pilot's expression didn't soften. "Step aside, Lauren," he said, his voice firm but laced with discomfort. Lauren's smile faltered, her arms crossing defensively. "Excuse me? I'm handling this." The pilot's eyes flicked to Naomi, then back to Lauren. "I just got a call from management," he said, his words measured. "The owner of this plane is on board. It's Miss Williams." The cabin erupted in gasps. The socialite's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "She owns the plane," she whispered, disbelief coloring her tone. The businessman nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "I figured," he murmured, as if he'd suspected it all along. Grace exhaled, relief washing over her. Lauren's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That can't be right," she stammered, her voice losing its edge. "There's a mistake." The pilot shook his head, pointing to Naomi. "No mistake. Miss Williams is the owner." Naomi remained seated, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. The weight of the revelation settled over the cabin, shifting the power dynamic in an instant. Lauren's earlier bravado crumbled, her hands clenching at her sides. She looked at Naomi, searching for a way to backtrack, but Naomi's steady gaze offered no mercy. The passengers' murmurs grew louder, some shaking their heads, others whispering in awe. Mr. Raymond, the older passenger, set his newspaper down, his wife pausing her knitting to nod approvingly at Naomi. The socialite's companion muttered, "She's been so calm this whole time." Lauren's mind raced, her thoughts a jumble of panic and denial. She'd assumed Naomi was out of place, a nobody trying to sneak into luxury. Now, the truth hit her like a tidal wave. She tried to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know." Naomi finally stood, her movements graceful, her navy blazer still damp but her presence commanding. "You didn't know because you didn't care," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "You judged me based on your assumptions, not facts. That's your failure, not mine." The words cut deep, and Lauren flinched, her face burning with shame. The passengers nodded, their earlier silence giving way to quiet support. The businessman spoke up, his tone calm but firm. "She's right. You didn't even check the list." Lauren's eyes darted to Grace, who stood silently, her expression unreadable. The junior attendant's call had set this in motion, and Lauren sensed it, her panic deepening. She turned back to Naomi, desperation creeping into her voice. "Please, Miss Williams, I didn't mean." Naomi held up a hand, silencing her. "You meant every word, every action," she said, her tone unwavering. "You humiliated me, assaulted me, and disrespected every passenger here by abusing your position." The cabin was silent, the weight of Naomi's words settling over everyone. Lauren's shoulders slumped, her earlier defiance gone. She looked around, hoping for an ally, but found none. The socialite avoided her gaze, the businessman's stare was cold, and even Grace looked away, her loyalty clearly shifting. The pilot stepped forward, his voice professional but firm. "Miss Williams, how would you like to proceed?" Naomi's gaze didn't waver from Lauren. "This needs to be addressed immediately," she said. "Her behavior is unacceptable, and I want to ensure it never happens again." Lauren's heart sank, her mind scrambling for a way out. She took a step back, her instincts urging her to flee, but the pilot blocked her path. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The cabin buzzed with anticipation, the passengers leaning forward, their phones discreetly raised to capture the moment. Naomi's presence filled the space, her quiet authority undeniable. Lauren's arrogance had unraveled, replaced by a dawning realization of the consequences she faced. Naomi's earlier warning echoed in her mind, "You'll regret this." The flight attendant's stomach churned, the truth sinking in. She'd let prejudice and anger cloud her judgment, and now, the owner of the airline stood before her, ready to deliver justice. The plane soared on, but for Lauren, the ground was gone. The cabin waited, breathless, for what came next. Naomi's calm was no longer just defiance, it was power, and Lauren was about to learn just how much trouble she'd brought upon herself. The cabin crackled with anticipation, the pilot's words still ringing. "Miss Williams is the owner." Naomi stood, her navy blazer slightly damp but her presence towering, her calm authority filling the space. Lauren's face was ashen, her earlier bravado reduced to a flicker of panic. Her eyes darted around, seeking an escape, but the passengers' stares pinned her in place. The nosy socialite clutched her companion's arm, whispering, "She's done for." The businessman sat back, his expression grim but satisfied, as if justice was unfolding exactly as it should. Grace, the junior attendant, stood quietly, her relief palpable, her call to management now bearing fruit. Naomi's gaze locked onto Lauren, steady and unyielding. "Lauren, your behavior today has been disgraceful," she said, her voice low but cutting through the silence like a knife. "You humiliated me, assaulted me, and tarnished this airline's reputation with your prejudice." Lauren's mouth opened, but no words came. Her hands trembled, her mind racing for a defense, but Naomi's presence silenced her. The passengers nodded, their murmurs of agreement growing louder. Mr. Raymond, the older passenger, gave Naomi a small nod, his wife setting her knitting aside to listen intently. Lauren stammered, her voice barely audible. "Miss Williams, I didn't know who you were." Naomi's eyes narrowed, her tone sharp. "You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with respect. Every passenger deserves dignity, and you failed because you judged me before you even checked the list." The words stung, and Lauren flinched, her face burning with shame. The socialite whispered to her companion, "She's right, you know." The businessman spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "You didn't even try to do your job properly." Lauren's eyes flicked to Grace, who looked away, her loyalty now firmly with Naomi. The pilot stood nearby, his posture tense but professional. "Miss Williams, what would you like to do?" he asked, his tone deferential. Naomi's gaze didn't waver from Lauren. "Her actions have consequences," she said, her voice steady. "Effective immediately, Lauren is fired." The words hit like a thunderclap, and Lauren's knees buckled slightly, her breath catching. "No, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean." Naomi cut her off, her tone cold. "You didn't mean to get caught. But you did, and now you'll face the consequences." Gasps rippled through the cabin. The socialite's eyes widened, her earlier gossip replaced by awe. The businessman nodded, his arms crossed, while Mr. Raymond muttered, "About time." Lauren's face crumpled, tears welling as she realized the gravity of her mistake. She looked to the passengers, hoping for sympathy, but found only judgment. The cabin's atmosphere shifted, the tension giving way to a sense of inevitability. Naomi's authority was absolute, and Lauren's arrogance had nowhere left to hide. Before Lauren could respond, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're making an unscheduled landing. Please remain seated." Murmurs of confusion spread, passengers exchanging glances. The businessman leaned toward Naomi, whispering, "What's happening?" Naomi didn't answer, her expression serene but unreadable. Lauren's panic deepened, her eyes darting to the front of the cabin as the plane began its descent. The hum of the engines grew softer, the reality of her situation sinking in. The plane touched down smoothly, and moments later, a sleek black SUV pulled up on the tarmac. Two sharply dressed assistants stepped out, their movements brisk and purposeful. They climbed the plane's steps, their presence commanding immediate attention. Miss Williams, one said warmly, bowing slightly. Everything is ready for your review. The cabin fell silent, the passengers watching in stunned awe. Lauren's face drained of what little color remained. Miss Williams, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Naomi stepped forward, adjusting her blazer, her calm radiating power. I'm Naomi Williams, she said, her voice steady and commanding. I own this plane and this airline. The revelation landed like a second blow, and Lauren swayed, her legs trembling. The passengers erupted in murmurs, some pulling out their phones to record. The socialite gasped, she owns the airline? The businessman smiled faintly, as if he'd known all along. Grace's eyes shone with admiration, her earlier fear replaced by pride. Naomi turned to Lauren, her gaze unrelenting. You assumed I didn't belong because of how I looked, she said. You let prejudice guide your actions, and now you've lost everything you thought you controlled. Lauren's tears spilled over, her voice desperate. Please, I'm sorry, she sobbed. Naomi's expression hardened. Your apology means nothing without accountability, she said. You made your choices, and now you'll live with them. The sound of heavy footsteps interrupted the moment. 2 uniformed police officers boarded the plane, their faces stern. The passengers gasped, the tension spiking again. Miss Williams, one officer said respectfully, we received your report. Are you pressing charges? Naomi's gaze didn't waver. Yes, she said firmly. She assaulted me in front of witnesses. I expect her to be held accountable. Lauren's breath hitched, her eyes wide with terror. No, wait, this is a misunderstanding, she cried, her voice shrill. The officer stepped forward, producing handcuffs. Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault, he said, his tone matter-of-fact. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Lauren's hands shook as the cuffs clicked around her wrists, her sobs echoing through the cabin. She looked at Naomi, pleading. Please, I'm sorry. Naomi's expression remained impassive. You brought this on yourself, she said quietly, her words final. The passengers watched in silence as Lauren was led down the aisle, her once dominant presence reduced to a defeated, tear-streaked figure. The socialite shook her head, muttering, she should have known better. Mr. Raymond gave a small cheer, his wife clapping politely. Naomi turned to the cabin, her voice steady. I'm sorry you had to witness this, she said. This isn't the standard I expect on my planes. Moving forward, every passenger will be treated with respect. The cabin erupted in applause, the tension dissolving into admiration. Naomi's victory was undeniable, but the fight wasn't over. She knew this moment was bigger than one flight, it was about changing a system that let prejudice thrive. As Lauren disappeared down the steps, Naomi's resolve hardened. Justice had been served, but the real work was just beginning. The cabin buzzed with a new energy, the weight of Lauren's arrest lifting like a fog. Naomi stood at the center, her navy blazer still damp but her presence radiant with quiet triumph. The passengers' applause faded into murmurs of admiration, their eyes fixed on her. The nosy socialite, now humbled, leaned forward. Miss Williams, you're incredible, she said, her voice genuine. Naomi turned, offering a gentle smile. Thank you, she replied. Remember this, standing up for what's right is always worth it. The businessman nodded, his expression one of respect. Mr. Raymond folded his newspaper, clapping softly, while his wife beamed, her knitting forgotten. Naomi turned to Grace, the junior attendant who'd quietly supported her. Grace, she said, her tone warm, I noticed your professionalism today. You stepped up when it mattered. You'll hear from my office about a promotion. Grace's eyes widened, her face lighting up. Thank you, Miss Williams, she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. The passengers smiled, the warmth of the moment spreading. The pilot, still standing nearby, nodded at Naomi. We'll ensure this never happens again, he said, his tone firm. Naomi acknowledged him with a nod, her focus already shifting to the bigger picture. As the police escorted Lauren off the plane, her sobs echoed faintly from the tarmac. The once dominant flight attendant was a broken figure, her arrogance replaced by regret. The black SUV waited,
its driver holding the door for Naomi.
Her assistants flanked her, briefing her on her next meeting, but Naomi's thoughts lingered on the day's events. She stepped onto the tarmac, the fresh air a sharp contrast to the cabin's tension. The plane loomed behind her, a symbol of her empire and the change she was determined to drive. Weeks later, Naomi sat in a sleek studio, her poise unwavering under the bright lights of a televised interview. The interviewer leaned forward, captivated. "Miss Williams, your story has gone viral. Millions have seen how you handled that situation. What's your message?"
Naomi's gaze was steady, her voice clear.
"Respect is a right, not a privilege," she said.
"Everyone deserves dignity, no matter who they are or what others assume. True leadership means setting that standard and holding people accountable." The interviewer nodded, visibly moved.
"And for those facing similar challenges without your platform?"
Naomi's expression softened. "Strength comes from within.
You don't need wealth or a title to demand respect, just stand firm in your worth."
The interview sparked a firestorm online.
Hashtags like #RespectAboveAll and #NaomisVision trended for days, inspiring countless stories of people confronting prejudice in their own lives.
Naomi's public statement, released shortly after, doubled down.
"Luxury isn't about appearances," she said in a video that racked up millions of views.
"It's about the experience we create for everyone.
I'm implementing new policies across my airline to ensure every passenger feels valued." The policies included mandatory bias training, stricter oversight of staff behavior, and a passenger feedback system to catch issues early. The changes rippled beyond her airline, prompting other companies to re-evaluate their own practices. Naomi boarded another flight soon after, greeted by a new crew whose warmth was genuine. The lead flight attendant smiled broadly.
"Welcome aboard, Miss Williams. It's an honor." Naomi returned the smile, settling into her seat.
The atmosphere was lighter, the service impeccable, but more importantly, it was rooted in respect.
As the plane climbed, Naomi gazed out the window, the horizon stretching endlessly before her.
A sense of peace settled over her. The events of that fateful flight had left a mark not just on the passengers and crew, but on everyone who'd heard the story. She reached for her phone, checking messages from her team. Reports of improved passenger satisfaction and glowing media coverage filled her inbox. But Naomi's mind was on the bigger mission.
This wasn't just about one incident, it was about dismantling a system that allowed prejudice to fester.
Every policy she enacted, every decision she made, was a step toward a future where respect was the default, not the exception. The jet soared higher, the clouds parting to reveal a brilliant sky. Naomi smiled, her reflection faint in the window. She knew the real victory wasn't in winning a single battle, it was in inspiring change that would last. The passengers on that earlier flight never forgot what they'd witnessed. The businessman shared the story at his company, sparking a push for diversity training. The socialite, chastened, became an advocate for fairness in her social circles.
Grace, now promoted, led with kindness, ensuring every passenger felt seen.
Even Mr. Raymond, typically reserved, wrote a letter to Naomi, thanking her for showing what leadership looked like. The story of Naomi Williams became a touchstone, a reminder that power wasn't in titles or wealth, it was in standing firm, demanding respect, and turning injustice into a lesson for all. As the plane leveled off, Naomi leaned back, her thoughts clear. The turbulence of that day had passed, but its impact would endure. She'd turned humiliation into a triumph, not just for herself but for everyone who'd ever been judged unfairly. The world below faded into a sea of blue, and Naomi felt a quiet certainty. This was her vision, her legacy, a world where dignity wasn't negotiable. The jet hummed softly, carrying her toward her next destination, and Naomi knew she was just getting started.